Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there, continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond one at a time. We're now on episode 7 of season 6, Jealous Robert. This is a Tom Caltabiano and Ray Romano written episode, and given what we see involving the dynamics of the Barones, especially Robert with everyone else, I could definitely see Ray's fingerprints in this episode. It definitely has his hallmark in there. Now, before I get too far in, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to do a one-off request or one-off support, go the PayPal route. If you would like to continuously support the channel and be able to suggest topics for future videos, go the Patreon route. Either way, your continued support on this channel is appreciated. Now, Jealous Robert. It has been a while since we've seen an episode centered around Robert and his relationships, especially his on-again, off-again, and definitely off for the next season relationship with Amy. And here we go again with it. And as the title suggests, he's going to be jealous over something. Now, the episode begins with Ray watching a game with his buddies, Andy and Gianni. Debra comes down and mentions that they have a canceled ticket for the play that she and Ray are going to go see the next night. She's asking them, of course Andy's being his usual self, is there nudity? And Johnny, after a little bribery from Ray, decides to go. So it's going to be those three and Amy, or as they call her at first, Robert's Amy, which we haven't seen her since Let's Fix Robert, which we all remember what I thought of that hit piece of a episode about when it comes to them ragging on Robert. So I'm not going to drag that horse up and start beating it to death again. Now they go. Everything seems fine. Then the next morning, Robert shows up, and it seems like he heard about the little double date, and he's asking about it. Like, hey, did they sit next to each other? Did they share an armrest? And it's pretty obvious from the get-go, well, that he's fishing for information, and it's because he's jealous. Now, this is one of those situations where it's like, Robert, do you really have the right to be jealous, considering that the only reason you and Amy broke up in the first place was because, granted, we don't know if you actually did do the hanky-panky with the other two, but you had to run around with 3 women at the same time because, once again, you didn't know what you wanted. You really don't there, but at the same time, you balance that he probably is still hurting here, and then seeing her going not only with someone new, but with someone new that happens to be a close-ish friend who is known for being a ladies' man, which they do bring up in dialogue. As Robert himself mentions, you're the one always telling him to tell his latest erotic escapade. You combine those two things, and you can kind of see why Robert at least would want to know some stuff about what's going on, because even though Amy is an adult and can handle herself, as Debra rightly points out to Robert, considering it's Gianni, it's one of those things like, can you blame him? I mean, if you were in Robert's shoes and one of your exes start dating one of your friends who is known to be a philanderer, how would you feel? I personally don't really have any friends I would call philanderers, but in that situation, I would at least be wanting to, like, hey, just be careful, you know how he is. You know, if you catch feels, just try to make sure they're not one-sided. You don't want him to make it seem like he does, but then it turns out he doesn't, and then hurt you. That sort of thing. Now, as it goes on, Ray finds out that this whole little thing that looked like it was going to be a coincidence, it's not. It's Debra and Marie trying to put Robert and Amy back together, because they're trying to make it look like Robert really does care for her and he wants to go back to her. Now, from a continuity standpoint, some of the dialogue here makes it seem like their last relationship implosion was Robert breaking up with Amy, when it was Amy breaking up with him. I mean, she slapped him twice and then walked out. That's her breaking up with him. That is one reason that watching these episodes in syndication, which this is another episode I'll watch in syndication, made trying to follow the course of the breakup and get back together so difficult unless you actually know what order the episodes came in. So watching these episodes and these seasons on DVD, it was like a godsend, because I'm like, okay, that's that breakup, That's that breakup. That's that breakup. That's it. And then I get to this one. I'm like, ah. And I didn't really notice the thing I just mentioned until I was watching now. I'm like, wait a minute. That's not how that happened. But that's probably Tom and Ray forgetting something. And since Ray in character is saying it in the heat of the moment, that's why he's saying it. And Deborah's not going to go back because of his little rant and the fact that she points out the fact that Robert got jealous only shows that he still has feelings for her. And with Marie, we all know the reason why she's doing this is because she wants Robert to be with somebody, give her grandchildren, her old little spiel we've been hearing about since season 3 when they first broke up, where she's showing her bias and all that. Now, of course, this being a comedy, there's going to have to be a little road bump somewhere. And that road bump comes in the form of the fact that Amy and Gianni hit it off and they're going to go out again that night. Now, Debra and Marie did not have anything in mind for this plan. And I love how Ray plays it when he finds out, like, oh, congratulations, see what you did. You can tell he's enjoying this. He's not going to enjoy it if it ends up hurting Robert, but he's going to take it one step at a time. But at least in the moment, he's like, ah, yeah. Now, we get to the next moment. This is going to be the fun part, where everybody finds out. Gianni and Amy show up. Debra and Marie start talking with her. Ray's trying to keep everyone separated so that Plan B doesn't go into effect. And then Robert shows up because Marie invited him over because she smelled gas. Now, Frank is present at this time because he's fixing something that Robert broke accidentally when he left. And the whole thing comes out where we see that this is the whole plan. Everyone finds out. Well, except Gianni and Amy don't really find out. They make the moment gets awkward because Robert's looking at him and is like, yeah. And he points out something that is kind of a good thing. It's kind of the unwritten guy and gal code, and that is don't date a close friend's ex. And that alone you can see does hurt Robert a little bit, especially since it's Gianni. I mean, they're not super close, but they are close-ish. So that, and Gianni's like, I didn't know, man. It's like, really? You guys always seem to go with the stereotypical bro code, so it's like, how do you not know? I guess it's just one of those things where Gianni, when it gets convenient, is not going to want to do it. Anyway, Amy does put Robert a little bit in his place just by looking up at him. You want to say anything else? And before she and Gianni leave. Now, after this is when Ray finally does spill the beans after a little momentary recovery, which I'll address in a second. And, of course, Robert rightfully leaves. Now, this whole scene ties back into something that is mentioned before when Ray's talking with Frank in the kitchen. Because you might hear some of this, but this whole time a lot of this back and forth is going. He's in the kitchen fixing the doorknob. And we find out a little bit more of the background information about Marie and Frank's relationship, which the scene later on is going to contextualize a little bit. And that is that when they were first seeing each other and dating, they were together for a while. How long, they don't mention. But it was serious enough because Marie was trying to, as Frank put it, put the screws on him to pop the question. And as Frank himself put it, there was still plenty of fish in the sea, and I wasn't ready to hang up my tackle box. Then, of course, he heard that she was going to make dinner for a guy called Chuck Pecorella. And he didn't want Marie doing that for another guy, so he punched his car, got his hand stitched up, went over to Marie's house, and popped the question. And, of course, we all know they got married. Now, IMDb tries to mention this as a possible character error or plot hole, but what we hear about them in this episode does not contradict what we heard about him in Season 2 when we found out that Robert was conceived out of wedlock. And as Frank put in that episode, it was just a once and then they had to get married. Because all we know about in that episode is that they succumbed to temptation once before they got married. They could have been engaged already for a while, planning everything. And then passions flared, they had sex. She found out she was pregnant, and they're like, okay, now we have to do it. Or at least, with the old school mindset, they had to. So they could go together, and I'd say they fit nicely with how they're written. Now, the thing we find out later is that the whole Chuck Pecorella situation was a honeypot for Marie, just like what they were trying to do to try to get Amy and Robert back together here. Because we find out that Chuck Pecorella was gay. Nobody knew that, given the time period. Obviously, he's not going to be open about it. Because, people be like, yeah, motherfucker. Take a bat to him or something. It's the East Coast. Now, Frank didn't know that Chuck Pecorella was gay, obviously. Found out all that, and it worked. And as we can see, it did work because they are married still. What makes this is that Frank is the only one who does not find out about Chuck Pecorella. And the payoff for that joke is when Robert goes to leave, he's like, I'm starting to think Chuck Pecorella had the right idea. Now, Frank knew about Chuck Pecorella at this point. We all know how he'd react. We saw how he reacted in season 4 when everybody was talking about the possibility of Robert being gay, or what if he was gay and all that. And everybody threw the thing, him with a carton of milk being like... So, good thing he doesn't. But he does have some funny lines involving it. That guy owes me, I'm serving his life sentence. No, you're not, Frank. You're serving your own life sentence, as you say. Say do it. It's life without the possibility of parole after 30 years. I didn't have to throw that in there. Now, there's another thing where Debra in the final joke mentions something about this being a similar thing with Ray, but that's one of those things that might be just a gag she's mentioning, and maybe at first, but it's one of those ones that, like, I can't see the Debra we see in that season 3 episode doing that, but we never know. Maybe it was, and then she's like, alright, I'll take a chance on him, see, and then it blossomed into something. Now, there is a deleted scene for this episode that takes place at the beginning of the second date night, where Debra comes down after hugging the kids, and she's asking Ray about her dress. Hey, is there any toothpaste on the back? There is. He's playing nonchalant at first, and he's making Gianni and Amy jokes, or as I put it, as their ship name, Gianni. You know, like, oh, maybe they'll get married, maybe they'll have children and all that. And she points out something that is pretty accurate, and that is, you see Gianni marrying somebody. I don't. His character, and how he's written and how he's portrayed so far in the show, strikes me as somebody that's always going to play the field and never settle down. As the old school song says, I'm the kind of guy who likes to roam around. He's the wanderer, this Gianni. Now, the fun little thing here is that at one point, to keep Ray from saying something, Debra hits him in the groin area. Now, apparently when they filmed this, Patricia Heaton accidentally hurt Ray, because I guess she hit him a little too hard. She's supposed to mime it or make it look like it hurt without it. But apparently she hit him a little too hard in the groin, and he had to ad-lib his next few lines, which it definitely comes across it. But Ray stays in character with it enough to where it actually seems like it's a full performance and not just half acting, half serious. And it's something I never noticed about that, but watching that again, it's like, oh, you could definitely tell. Now, one thing about this that's interesting is that Marie doesn't react to Debra's actions here. Some might say that's a little out of character for her, considering how we've seen her react in other situations. But considering that it's to get him to shut up to not spoil their plan, and the fact that Debra and Marie both have slapped Ray in similar situations, I could see Marie thinking, like, okay, that's not what I would do, but okay, desperate times call for desperate measures. It's a nice little back and forth there. And that's really all I've got to say about it. I mean, it's a back and forth thing about Robert just being jealous, whether it's justifiable or not. But you can understand why he at least would be a little concerned for Amy in this situation, considering Gianni. And of course, as we find out in the ending, this is the beginning of the Gianni-Amy relationship. But the fun thing about this is that I already knew that it wasn't going to be permanent by the time I watched this episode, because I'd already seen the episode where we find out they break up. And I had already seen their wedding episode, so that just makes it a little even funnier, like, oh yeah, that's not going to work. But watching it in sequence and at the time, you're like, oh yeah. And I'm looking at the rest of the episodes on this disc. I think they don't break up until the next disc. It's going to be the episode where everybody's snowbound. And the box set's over there. I don't want to get up and grab it, but I think it's probably somewhere on the next disc, or at the very latest, the 4th disc. So it's not going to last too long. Just enough to be a background little subplot. And the next couple episodes don't really bring it up that much, other than like a couple jokes in one of them. And of course, in the next episode, we're going to see the return of one of Ray's minor nemesis from Season 2. Actually, in that one, he was more Debra's minor nemesis, but he became Ray's a little bit. Here, he's going to be full-on Ray's. Played by a Simpson voice actor. It's going to be Homer Simpson himself returning as Brian in the episode It's Supposed to Be Fun. which, funny enough, I saw this one before its original, so that'll be interesting to talk about. Till next time, guys.